Hey everybody, welcome back to another week of After Effects tutorials. So this week we're going to tackle something that is probably going to be your least favorite thing to do in After Effects. It generally is for people, and that is rotoscoping. That said, I've gotten more jobs doing rotoscoping work than any other kind of visual effects stuff because people don't like it so much. So if there's some way that you can kind of find joy in it, you can certainly make a few bucks doing it, and also, you know, get really fast at it too, because generally you're paid by the job and not per hour of work. So I will show you how to do that, and to do that we're going to go ahead and download this video off of Canvas. So if you go under Files, you should see something called slider.move. I need you to download that, and then we can work from there. This is a very, not very, but fairly complicated rotoscope. If there was like people's hair or something like that, that makes things really, really difficult. But, you know, it's a fairly difficult one, and I'll show you why once we get into it. Also, I noticed in the files area that I did upload a 1080p 35 millimeter film grain for you. I think I had that up before we did stuff that may have needed 35 millimeter film grain. That is free for you guys to use at any point. We could potentially use that with this project too. So let's go ahead and download it, and I'll show you how to use that as well. All right, so inside Adobe After Effects, we're going to import both of those pieces of footage. I have both of them imported already, and we are going to create a new composition out of the slider.move video file. So here is slider.move, and if I scrub forward, I can see that it's just these two cars that pass through the foreground. The camera's on a slider, and it kind of pushes in towards the background there. The two cars pass by, and that's it. And what we want to do with it is we want to maybe add some text behind both cars, and it kind of looks like the cars are passing in front of the text. Now, the same kind of project or the same kind of effect can be done for virtually anything that passes through the foreground. And the more or the less complex the object that's passing through the foreground is, the easier this will be to do. So like if you have a camera that kind of pans by a wall or something like that, it's just a straight line wall, it would be really easy to mask that and animate that mask with the camera. And you can basically use the same philosophies that we'll learn for this bit of footage with any of your footage if you want to do something like a complex credit sequence, or even some titles that come in the middle of a film or something like that. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to trim this up a little bit. You see like there's a little bit of a bump before the camera starts moving. We just don't want the bump. We can start when the camera just starts to move forward, or a little bit into the move. And then at the end, after the cars pass, there's a little bit of extra time here. And I don't think we need quite as much. So I'm going to go to about 6.5 seconds and trim that up there too. If yours is a little bit different than mine, that's no big deal. We can play that back. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. And then we can start working on this stuff. So we do need to animate the mask. We need to create the mask before we animate it though. And the best way I can tell you to do it is try to find a point where the car is almost completely visible. The way that this project is pretty difficult is that you never see the entirety of either car in any frame. So when the back part of this car is in the frame, it's obscured by this other car, and the other car will never see the entirety of at all because it's too far in the foreground. So you have to kind of presume a few things about the shape of these cars. But I am going to try to find a frame where I can see almost all of the car, and maybe that's my frame right there. Okay, now before I start creating my masks, I need multiple layers here. It's very similar to what we did with the parallax effect from last week, except we are just working in two-dimensional space for the actual rotoscoping part of this. When we mess with the text, we can jump that out to 3D space. Okay, so we're going to duplicate this layer 2 times. So we have 3 layers. One of these things we're going to call the background. Layer 2 here we're going to call background car. Okay, and then the uppermost layer should be called foreground car. Now that is assuming that you don't want to put any text in front of this car here, which if you did, you would have to rotoscope that as well. All right, so let's get started. Let's find that frame with the car, and there it is. So we're going to use the pen tool here, and I am going to just kind of zoom in. I'm working with my trackpad, so bear with me. Okay, and I'm going to work my way through here. Remember that H on your keyboard is hand, so you can kind of move your stuff around if you don't have a mouse. And the pen tool is G on your keyboard, and I'm definitely going to jump between those two things. Since we aren't really moving the video around or anything, we're not seeing different frames of it, we can go ahead and jump this into full resolution here so we can see our video a little bit better and crisper. So I'm going to go ahead and start my mask on the background car, so I want to make sure that that's selected, and it might be a good policy just to shy out all other layers and then maybe even put locks on those layers. So if I accidentally clicked my foreground car and I was masking the wrong layer, I wouldn't be able to. If I click on that, it just will not select. If you see a new layer get created as you start to use the pen tool, so if I do this, then I'm creating a shape layer, and you certainly don't want that. Another very common pitfall in rotoscoping is you have your regular mouse selected and you accidentally double click and you jump into the layer view and you say, I don't understand what's going on, nothing I do will work. That's because you're looking specifically at this layer and not your composition. So make sure your composition view's up there. If at any point your mask suddenly seems to disappear or what you've masked isn't working correctly, check to make sure that you're in your composition view and not your layer view. All right, pen tool activated, background car layer is selected, and now I'm just going to draw around my car. Okay, I'm just gonna time lapse you through this real quick so it doesn't take forever. All right, now I've completed my mask, and as soon as I complete my mask, you should see the background kind of drop out, and all of a sudden we have just our car there. So this is the beginnings of our rotoscope. Now, there's a couple of different ways that we could approach this. One is what I've just done here, where I've outlined the entirety of the shape. I'm going to animate that outline throughout the length of the video. The other way is to create several masks. So we could have several masks all on one layer. So we could do the body of the car and we could do the wheels separate. So right away I can see that there's going to be a problem area because this car is not moving through, not moving directly horizontally with the frame. It's kind of moving through Z space a little bit. So you see how I can see this, both front wheels, I can see this front wheel on the other side of the car, but I can't see that with the back wheels. And I know that eventually this wheel is going to go away and that this wheel is eventually going to show. So I have a bit of an issue, and I can correct that in a couple of ways. If I'm going to do this way, which I would say is probably faster but less precise, if it's just the outline of the car, I can always add points later to my mask. And you always, there we go. If you just click along the path, we can add points, and then we can manipulate those points as we need to eventually. Now, we do want to make sure that there's as few points as possible while it's still maintains the shape of the thing that you want to cut out. The less points there are, the easier this thing is going to be to animate. You do need as many points as you need to actually make the shape though. So don't like cut out, say, the mirror up here or one of the tires. Make sure that you have everything that you need there. And you can always add a few more later, but they are going to kind of be static until they're needed, right? So if I put a bunch of points on here, they're just going to stay on that line until you tell it in keyframes when it's supposed to change. Okay, so I'm going to go with this one, and what I'm going to do from here is refine my mask just a little bit. So if I take a look at what's going on here, we do have some motion blur and stuff, and maybe things aren't quite in focus. We can see that motion blur on the car there, which means that this car shouldn't have really distinct masking lines. So if I just go ahead and change my composition background real quick, so I'm going to go under composition settings here, change this to white so I can just see what's going on a little bit better, and I'm going to turn off my mask shape visibility. I can see that it looks very angular and cut out. I can clean up my mask a little bit in a, I guess, sort of cheap way by using a mask feather. So if I go under my mask, if I twirl down under mask, I can see mask feather here, and I can just turn that up. So if I ungang the mask feather here, I can turn vertical feather up. You can see that it blurs out vertically there, or I can turn up the horizontal blur. And because we have like this horizontal movement of the car, that's probably a better way to go. That's way too much there, but I can turn that down a little bit, and that's gonna kind of replicate some of that motion blur there. Okay, I could add just maybe a little bit of vertical as well to clean up some of the problem areas I have. And then if you see like some parts of the original video are exposed, you can always use that mask expansion there as well. You don't want to mess with that mask opacity. You probably don't want to keyframe the mask feather either, because the car's kind of moving in a constant pace and stuff. You could potentially do it if the car was like stopping and starting or changing its pace rather quickly. What we do want to keyframe is this mask path though. So if we just toggle on keyframes for mask path, now we can animate that path frame by frame in an excruciating fashion. We can just kind of jump back a couple of frames. So in case you didn't know about it, in After Effects, if you use page up and page down on your keyboard, that will jump you one frame forward or one frame in reverse. If you're used to using the arrow keys in Premiere, that might be just a little bit different for you. I'm just gonna go backwards a couple of frames. And I do want to do a couple of frames because remember, between two frames, we have that kind of keyframe interpolation, and it should be able to kind of match my car. So you see that already moving through Z space because it's kind of going diagonally. I'll have to reshape my mask. But I'll jump 2 frames and I'll use my regular pointer tool. The pen tool will work as well, just to move this entire mask back over the car. I don't want to click the actual video and move the video because that'll move the car itself, the video footage, and the mask at the same time. You want to place that mask back over the car. Now, a couple of things that'll help you with this stuff. If all of the nodes on your mask are solid squares, you can grab and move the entirety of the mask. Now, if they are all solid dots, you can grab one and move it individually. So if I have my selection tool turned on, just V on my keyboard for that, and I just click anywhere, just temporarily, you'll see all of those squares have now turned to solid dots. I can grab any one of those individually and move those, or I can grab a group of them by dragging a rectangle around the group, and they'll turn into those little squares. So all around them are unfilled squares, and those aren't being moved or manipulated. So I can move like those three really quickly and do each individually to kind of expand that that tire area, and then I can mess with these as well. I'll just pull it down for a second to see where that tire actually is and manipulate those as well. All right, so that should have done me between this frame and this frame, but how about in between the two? It did a very solid job there. So that means that's one frame that I don't have to keyframe. And I'm gonna just kind of approach it that way. And if I'm feeling really ambitious, or if I'm feeling very lucky, I will skip maybe 2 or 3 frames and try it that way. And sometimes this will work if everything's kind of moving at a constant rate. I will tell you that these cars don't move at a constant rate, so you're probably looking at every other frame to create a keyframe, if not every frame. So we will do this entire process the same way, both forward and backwards with this car. And I'm going to go ahead and open up a completed version of this project to show you what happens. So here's a version of this project that I've done before. I've done this project several times actually, but this was from the After Effects class. So this is what you should end up with your first car, with your background car, right? At the end of animating this thing, you should have the car enters and then disappears at the point where the other car completely obscures it. So there's no remnants of any kind of mask on the frame either before or after the car has entered, so we don't see anything cut out yet. And then the very first moment that the car enters, great, all the way until it's covered up, and then that mask is out of the frame now. So we just move that outside of the frame, and then it's totally safe. If it's anywhere left in the frame, that could really mess with your project, or being able to add stuff in and see it properly. Then we're going to move over to the foreground car, and we're doing the same exact thing. I'm just going to unlock that so you can see what's going on here. And this one's a lot more difficult. So once again, we are animating a mask around this car, but we never know what the car looks like until it actually shows in the frame. We could work the same way we did with the other one, where we work backwards, but then we don't know what the front side of the car looks like. So you may be tempted to add just a whole bunch of nodes along your mask as you create it, just put a bunch of them back there, or presume what the car kind of looks like. But again, I would suggest you add those as you get to that point. We can always add a node right here, and it's just going to stay along that line the entire time until I tell it, hey, now we need you to move a little bit. So it was fine, and now it moves just a little bit, and then it moves right back. So that's something to consider. Whatever your workflow is probably just fine. I would highly recommend finding yourself some good music while you're doing this stuff, because it is quite time consuming. All right, when you get both of these cars done, maybe pause the video until then, come back, and then we'll get started on the next thing. All right, so you're back. I assume that your mask looks pretty good. And just as a quick refresher, your stuff doesn't have any kind of remnants of the original footage except for the two cars, and it starts out in black. Then the two cars pass through and then disappear as they exit the frame. If that's the case, awesome. Make sure that you still have a background layer, and you can toggle that back on, and what we have is the original footage. It looks exactly like the original footage, except we have these cutouts of cars, and it's imperceivable to us, all the layers that are there, because they are all the same footage at the same time. If you find that your cutout layers of cars is off a little bit from the original footage, it's pretty common to have happen. So let's say I click my foreground car here and I just move it off a little bit. Oops. So here's the foreground car off just a hair here, or pretty considerably, I guess. And you can see that kind of messed up footage thing that's going on here. Really simple to fix. It should be 960 by 540 on position for any of your layers. That includes the background layer if you happen to move that for some reason. That's going to be a constant with 1080p footage. And if you can't remember those numbers, you can always open up a different layer that is in the correct position, and then just click P for position and copy and paste those numbers to your other layers. So what we have is a rotoscoped scene, and it's looking good. It looks just like our original footage. Now, the whole idea here is that I could create some text or put an object in here. I could put a ball in here, whatever I want, and I'll just write text real quick. All right, so there's some text. And if I put this on a layer that's beneath the foreground and background car, but above the background layer, then it's obscured by the cars as they pass by. Cool. So that's the big effect. And then what we want to have happen is our text changes to say something else after, the cars pass by, which we know how to do. No problems there. But let's make our text look a little bit nicer. So I'm just going to make mine super generic and call it text 1 and text 2. But my text doesn't seem to really fit very well in the space. So I want to kind of 3D this text, so we'll just turn it into a 3D layer there, and then we'll use the rotation to rotate along the y-axis to kind of put it in the same kind of orientation as our street there. We might need a little bit of X rotation as well. So a little X rotation, a little Y rotation will really help sell that this exists in that space. Okay, what else I would like to do is maybe add some extrusion depth. We probably remember how to do that, but if not, that is under geometry options under our text. So if we twirl down and twirl down on geometry options, we'll see that we have extrusion depth available to us. And that's just going to make our stuff look a little bit more bold at the moment because we don't have lights on it and stuff. And then we could add a bevel and a bevel style. We really won't be able to tell what that looks like just yet, but we'll be able to tell as soon as we create a couple of lights. So let's go ahead and do that right now. We'll right click in the empty layer area and go to New Light. Okay, and I want to color these lights the same as the colors of these street lights. So we see that there's two colors here. One is like a kind of daylight looking thing, and the other one's much more tungsten. So I'm just going to use the color picker here, and I'm going to select an area that's pretty orangey on the wall here. We're presuming that this wall is white. So I'll call this street light. I'll call this street light left because this is on the left side of the frame here. and I'll make sure that it is in the correct position. So I'll just move this approximately where this light is. Lights are not visible on screen, so it can kind of be, you know, a little bit in the frame, and then we'll just point it toward our text. And since it's not doing very much right now, we can adjust the intensity of that light. So we just double click the light, go to intensity, and right now it's at 10%. So I'll start turning that up until it does what I want it to do. So it's painting in that text pretty nicely with a color that looks pretty close to these street lights, or this street light. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and create another street light. We're going to go to Layer, New, Light. And in this case, we're going to select this little bit of daylight looking stuff. Actually, it looks like there's white right here. And it's, to my eye, it looks, I guess, a little bit pink. Not as blue as I thought. So I'll call this one Street Light Right, press OK, and then I will position that one approximately where that light is. Okay, and we'll point it kind of down. And maybe we'll go ahead and turn down the intensity on that one just a little bit so we get a little bit more of that yellowy light coming in from the side. All right, that looks pretty good. So I'm happy with what my text looks like right here. Now, if I play this back and forward, I'll notice that because the camera pushes in with that slider movement, my text really falters at this point. It looks just fine or sort of okay as this car kind of passes by and this car kind of passes by. But as the camera's pushing in, doesn't look so great. So we are going to fix that up a little bit. Okay, so we want this text to kind of come at us the same way the background or the street level comes at us. So the temptation that you might have if you have cursory knowledge of After Effects and stuff is to use the track camera function under tracker over here. And what that does is places a whole bunch of tracking points on your video, and then you can create a camera that follows those tracking points. If you do that though, what's going to end up happening, since I've done this several times, or this footage several times, is it's going to put a bunch of track points on the background, which is far enough away that it doesn't really move at you in the same way that the street moves at you, or this line here moves at you. And you can't really use the street either because you have these cars that pass through the frame like they do, and that would obscure those track points. So instead, we're just going to kind of do it manually, which isn't very hard. All we have to do is click on our text layer, go to position, just like we have before, and then we want to make sure that our text stays the same distance away from our car here and this line in the road. And if you're at all kind of meticulous about this stuff, you can always use rulers. If you go under view here and then show rulers, and then we can do the same stuff that we've done before in Photoshop here in After Effects. So we can see that the distance from the edge of the T here to the end of the yellow line is approximately a little bit less, maybe 75 pixels there. So that's something to keep in mind. And then we can also do the same thing for the T, the bottom of the T there, to that yellow line again. And we can see that maybe that's what, that's close to maybe 50 pixels there. So if you want to be really precise about it, you can always right click any of the guidelines here, and where it says edit position, it has the actual number there. And if you are a math person, I am not, you can do some quick math, subtract one from the other, and understand how far away these things are. Since the camera does move, these numbers will change, so you can't say, oh, my text just needs to stay at this number, or it'll just stay in place the entire time. And the point is to move it with the yellow line there. So I'm going to put a keyframe on position for my text. Just twirl up on these other things. Position, keyframe there, because it is where I want it to be, and it's going to stay. Oh, I guess it does move forward a little bit more. So we'll make sure we get to the point where the camera has stopped moving, and that's where we want our keyframe to be. Okay, so I'm just moving that over. All right, looks good. I'm happy with that. And then I'm going to just move backwards from here to the point where the camera movement starts actually going. It does kind of take a quick second for it to start moving. Then I'm going to send my text backwards in Z space a little bit and try to approximate where my text should be. So my renders are going pretty slow at this point. Yours might too. So here's a couple of quick tips to to preview your stuff. I'm just going to turn off all of the layers that aren't my text and my background layer. Then I'm going to jump my resolution down as much as I can without it really causing an issue. So in my case, maybe half is good. And then there's one more thing over here for fast previews. We can turn that on. You see the little icon right there that looks like a thunder. It looks like a lightning bolt. We can change that over to fast draft, and now our stuff should play back just a little bit better. It's still a little slow, but at least I can see the movement and stuff if I needed to really adjust that. So the cars aren't passing in front of it because those layers are disabled right now, but I should be able to see how my text moves with my camera movement a little bit cleaner. And I would say that's pretty good. We do have the benefit of having the text in a place where it's kind of between some planes. So if it's a little bit different than the other ones, it's not going to look too out of place. So long as it kind of comes at you a little bit and doesn't move off to the left or right significantly, I think that you'll be pretty solid here. All right, time to toggle all that stuff back on and see what happens. I'm just going to let it play through a couple of times to see how everything's working. It looks pretty good. Nothing's jumping out at me as like an issue with any of my masks or my lights or anything like that. But I do want this kind of bit of magic to happen where the text changes as the cars obscure it. So the two cars pass by, they drive over text one, and then on the other side it says something else. So we should know how to do that. If you've forgotten where that is, that was back on the essential graphics area. Let's go ahead and cover that again. If I twirl down on text, I'll see under text again that there's a source text area here, and it is a keyframeable property, so we can adjust that over time. So I'm going to go ahead and add a keyframe at the point where the foreground car has completely obscured the text. So from the beginning until now, it's just going to say text 1, and then afterwards I'll skip a couple of frames forward. It doesn't matter so long as the car is still obscuring it. I can add another keyframe here, and I can adjust what it says by double clicking it and saying hello. How about hello? So now it's going to say hello once the cars pass by. So the car is now passed completely, and we see that it says hello, but before it says text 1. How about that? A little bit of magic for you. If you can't see what the text says because, you know, that car is obscuring it, I just typed behind it because I knew what it said. But you can shy out the foreground car so we can see what that text says and then bring it back when you're ready. Or, you know, you can move enough frames to where everything's out, change the text here, and then just move that keyframe back to a point where the car is obscuring it. So that's almost it. We're going to play this back, make sure it works as we intend it to work. Perfect. Maybe you can come up with some text that's a little bit more clever. You can always have different font and stuff like that, but maybe not text 1 and hello. But that will work in a pinch. Whatever you need to write there is just fine. So the last thing that we want to do is add that grain layer that I mentioned before. That will help this text look a little bit more like the original footage. Both the original footage and the text would have a grain overlay on top of it. So it'll all look like kind of one piece, which is something that I really like with my After Effects projects. It's something that I tend to do a lot of. So let's go ahead and do it real quick. We're going to select all of the layers here, and we're going to pre-compose those. So do all that, right click and pre-compose. Okay, we can name this car rotoscope. Press OK there, and now all of those attributes are inside that pre-comp for us. From here, you've already imported it, but because I did some extra stuff, or I kind of stole a different project so I wouldn't have to rotoscope this whole thing again, I am going to bring back my, my grain overlay. I need to re-import that real quick. Okay, so my grain is imported. I'm just going to drag and drop that on the uppermost layer. Somehow I got a text layer in there. Just delete that real quick. And that's going to cover up the original footage. I'm just going to zoom out just a little bit. And I see my grain layer looks good. It's just grain only right now. And I want to use a blending mode on this. So I can use a soft light or overlay. Use whichever one looks best to you, but use one that's probably a little too strong. That way you can turn it down just a little bit through opacity control. So I'm just going to click T on my keyboard and turn down the opacity just a little bit until that grain becomes subtle enough to barely see it. All right, so there it is. You have a completed rotoscope project. I'm sorry about this one. I know that it is quite tedious. So what I'm going to do is export this thing. You should export it too. Upload that to YouTube, post it on Canvas, and that is it. I have gotten a couple of emails from students a little bit curious about what they should be doing for their final projects and stuff. I know it's a little bit weird to not have very strict guidelines on this like we did with the design project that we had for the midterm, but it should give you a lot of creative flexibility to be able to do whatever makes sense to you, and something that you might use for future projects, whether that's a title sequence, an animated logo, maybe animating some of your illustrations that you've done in the past, anything that you can actually use for, say, your portfolio or future work. That's what I would like to see. But it does have to be appropriately difficult, so make sure that you post your idea on the Canvas discussions so we can talk about it and I can approve you for it before you start on it, and then you find out that it was just too easy for you to do. All right, so that's it for this week. I will see you all next week with another After Effects tutorial.